All right. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
In the Father, and the Son,
Son, Holy Ghost.
Amen.
How can we do that? I was never taught to do that for glory be.
It differs. It's one of those, some people do,
Well,
some people don't.
actually, the tradition is to bow.
Traditionalist bow.
No, the
tradition
tradition.
is-
See, this is how Catholics are. You said the tradition is to bow. He's right.
Oh, the tradition.
You heard it as the traditionalist bow, and then you incorporate that into your practice. So the next thing you say, you're at mass or something, Gloria, the traditionalist bow.
Well, you remember when Father Bishop is saying the Asperges at the beginning of Mass, and in the middle of it, there's the glory be to the Father and the Son, and that's when he stops, turns,
okay,
bows, he
That's
stops
right.
splashing everybody.
Yeah.
And if you're in a monastery, when you get to that, that's what they do. They just bow for that. So that's what I do. No one notices that I'm bowing because everyone's busy doing this. But
Some people cross themselves. Some people bow. It's one of these things where you have that holy liberty wherewith Christ has set us free. That's something we trads don't talk a lot about.
Is that right?
what, free?
What's the right way of,
Free.
What's free?
What's free? Listen,
what's
Well-
the right way of doing that?
there's no right way or wrong way. There's no right answers, no wrong answers. It's just what you make it out to be.
Which brings us to our topic for the evening.
Extra.
Terrestrials!
Dun, dun, dun.
UFOs!
Flying saucer.
Project Blue Book.
Area 59.
The Interrupted Journey.
The Outer Limits.
The Twilight Zone.
Star Trek.
The Next Generation.
Incident and Exeter.
The Next Generation after that.
The Day After Roswell. Alien Autopsy. Look, they've just come from an alien autopsy, and boy, do they look confused.
Hi.
There's something about pulling out those strange organs that gets me down. I don't know. Well, yes, welcome, ladies, welcome. Well, it's okay. We don't care, God does. So you said it with
Okay. Well, this is going to be our best-selling talk of all time because we're going to talk about something everybody wants to really know about.
UFOs. Is the government covering it up?
Yes.
Are aliens on ice
Yes.
at in Nevada?
Yes.
Did President Carter actually pilot a UFO?
Yes.
Is Mr. Donegan from outer space?
Definitely!
Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen. But
When his saucer landed, the Scotch fumes were trailing behind it. Amazing.
officials at Mount Palomar Observatory have reported the arrival of Dr. Alexis Zarkov, Flash Gordon, and Dale Arden in a rocket ship from the planet Mungo. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen. The most enduring mythic motif of our century has been aliens, outer space, a war of the worlds, first men in the moon.
Sounds exciting.
Yes, the terror from beyond space. The Thing.
Earth versus the flying saucers.
Amazons on the moon.
Amazon
Women on the
conquer-
moon.
Super Vixens conquer the universe.
I don't know.
They're
Mars attacks.
Mars
Attacks, yes.
Independence Day.
Yeah.
You betcha. Well, here's the question, ladies and gentlemen. Are aliens among us? Yes, two of them.
Two of them right here.
Thank you very much, Zapper Argon.
We bring you peace. We are your friends.
Well, in the immortal words of the Martians in Mars Attacks, the swage shall be gathered in the dark of the moon.
Yeah.
That's our message of hope to all of Earth. No, It has been an enduring thing, and of course, there's an awful lot of talk about the aliens, strange lights in the sky.
If you go to some of these lectures, and they're quite common on college campuses, whenever there's a lecture on UFOs and you have a couple hundred students piling into an auditorium, the lecturer will invariably say, how many people here have seen a flying saucer? And roughly 10% will put up, that's famous 10% that seems to
10%
pop
of
up.
everything.
So 10% of people have seen flying saucers. You know, and 10% of the 10% boarded flying saucers, and
10% of the 10% that boarded them
are now pregnant. I mean,
exactly, because that is a big motif in the modern abductee phenomenon. Is the notion that these women are being taken, sometimes men, but generally women, being taken and used for biological experiments. Being given. Now you know why they blew it up at Independence Day. They were covering their tracks. The truth will out. So that's a good point, you know.
Or as Jack Nicholson, as the president, said in Mars Attacks, 2 branches of government out of 3 ain't bad.
That's right. That's right. And that heavens, especially the one branch seems to keep growing. But at any rate, ladies and gentlemen, this is big stuff, and we as Catholics, as with all the other sorts of things we from time to time deal with in these talks, we as Catholics have to sort of encounter this phenomenon because we're part of the culture that is so heavily generated by it. As an avid reader of New Age rags myself, I can tell you that there's a certain, the UFO community, if I can call it that, is made up of several different factions, all right? There are your hard science people, and these are folks who are simply concerned with, well, if aliens are among us, how did they get here? What techniques do they have? You know, and again, they don't see it as anything more than encountering any other phenomenon. I mean, it's like any branch of what they call cryptozoology. Are there Sasquatch? Is there a monster in the bottom of Loch Ness? I mean, these are all questions that can be measured scientifically and so on. And the people that go after them very often don't look at them as any kind of religious revelation. The discovery of a new species, while it can have all sorts of impacts, does not necessarily, of and by itself, constitute any great thing in the religious world. But there are others for whom the border between spacemen and angels is very porous. I heard a traditionalist priest, granted he was from New Jersey, but still, get up at a traditionalist conference, and he actually said that the angels of the crucifixion were aliens. And I slapped my head. You know, I wanted to make sure to see if the hearing aid was in, and then I remembered I don't wear one, so I had problems. This was very strange. You know, and I looked up at the guy, and he's going out this and the end. And he was quite convinced of this. I don't want to mention his name because I've forgotten it. If I remembered it, believe me, I'd tell you. But, I mean, it's just wacky stuff. Well, that's bad enough in a priest, but I'll tell you, some of these New Age folk, I mean, you're all aware of the channeling phenomenon. Okay, now originally channeling wasn't any different, really, than spiritualistic seances. You know, where the medium would go into a trance and Aunt Daisy would start yapping out of her, supposedly. You know, I left the diamond ring underneath the cookie jar. Well, it's Aunt Daisy, you know. Of course, we don't have a cookie jar, and she never owned a diamond ring, but still. No, that was how it started. And then for the dead chaps and chapettes became more and more amazing until you had entities like...
Yeah, then they became entities, not just dead people.
Right, like Ramtha.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are visitors from the Pleiades cluster and things like that who just happen to be going by. They
start channeling aliens, then they start channeling dolphins.
Oh, God. Well...
Well, the point of all of this is that in your UFO community, you have, you might say, 2 currents. There are those that look at it simply as more or less another scientific endeavor. I mean, again, you know, to the degree that one is able to in all this stuff, they would attempt to apply scientific methods to it. Then you have the others who make a religion out of it.
As with so many things in our culture, that we can, in one sense, we can cast them aside and say this really isn't pertinent. It's not important. So what? But the fact is that our kids are subjected to this stuff constantly in the movies that they watch and the comic books that they read and so on. And the fact that most people, according to the Gallup polls, do believe that there are alien life forms out there. It's a common assumption in our culture. I'm sure you've heard it said, it would be the height of pride for man to assume that he's the only cognizant being in the universe. How dare we say such a thing when the universe...
It would be the height of ignorance in the face of experience to assume that he is cognizant. But go ahead.
What we're getting at here is that there is a very important implication. Is there cognizant life in the universe beyond human? Are we alone in the universe, or are there other beings? And if there are other beings in the universe, what, if anything, do they have to do with us? What do they have to do with our faith? What has been revealed about them?
Now, the first and most important thing to understand with all of this stuff, and listen closely, except for the possibility of a few favored souls who may have encountered such stuff, nobody really knows for sure.
You just gave away the punchline.
And I'll give it away all the way through.
Oh, okay.
It's going to be a recurring theme.
I was hoping we'd just build up to it, and then, 5 minutes before the end of the talk.
No, because somebody wouldn't catch it, and then during the questions and answers they'd be, but does that mean it's really just that way? No. Nobody knows for sure. And this is very, very important because we'll be dealing this evening with all sorts of theory and speculation. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. There are certain things that you can be assured it's not. There are a lot of things the phenomenon may be, but nobody knows for sure. And again, as a fervent follower of whole life expos and things like that, what I love is when there'll be talks from people who are in touch with the Galactic Confederation. I see. What is that cult? They're out like in Needles or San Bernardino, somewhat to the east of us. They're called the Solarians or something. They've got an incredible name, but they're very 50s science fiction. They're in touch with the Space Brothers and all that. And they have these processions. It's really wonderful.
Are those the people that went around with divining rods 100 years ago?
I don't think so. But no, this cult was founded in the 50s. But I mean, they've got this big place to the east of us. It's in like Rialto or Fontana or somewhere. And they have, it's very 50s. That's the only way I can describe it. I've seen them on TV. And they have these parades, sort of beauty pageants, with different people representing different star systems. It's really great, Miss Pleiades, Miss Cassiopeia, and then of course Earth. But it's great stuff, The Spice Girls, I think, represent the moons of Pluto. But see, somebody got that one. But in truth. We have to go back a little bit. I guess historical background is useful. There have always been lights in the sky. Always. And from the beginning to the present, the vast majority of us have no bloody idea what they mean. There are comets, and there are meteorites, and things fall from the sky. Do you know that the French Academy, the French Scientific Academy, which was the top scientific body in Europe of its day at the time, refused to admit the existence of meteorites until about 1820. Rocks can't fall from the sky. Everybody knows that. You bet. So, the problem in dealing with any of this area is that A, just because the establishment in science says something so, it doesn't mean it's true. But B, just because they're against it doesn't mean it's true. They were against a lot of other things in 1820 that would have been proven false. You can't really get flies from meat without fly eggs. There's no spontaneous generation. That doesn't happen. Well, the French Academy denied that it could happen in the 1820s, and you know what? It still can't happen. So, in looking at this, you've got to keep an extremely open mind. The wind should be able to blow through freely. What, but our current you might say cult of science fiction arose in the 19th century. And what's interesting about that is that at the same time that Christian belief was decaying, particularly in the Protestant countries and in France and places like that, amongst the intelligentsia, and as the Industrial Revolution sort of filled up the places where the intelligentsia lived with smoke and fumes, and as the rise in technology cut us off more and more from, shall we say, reality, the mind sort of made up for it. The old folklore died for a lot of people. A new one would have to come in its place. You know, it's just the way it is.
Or as one writer, I think it was Bishop Sheen once said, that when reason declines, imagination kicks in.
Sure. And of course, imagination is a very useful tool, ladies and gentlemen, in the sense that it can give flesh to the bare bones of fact. But what is a body without any bones? It's a blob. Not only that, you won't see one. They don't exist. And the problem that comes here is that, well, in the face of an apparently ever-increasingly dull reality, there's been a growth and a growth and a growth and a growth of fantasy. Now again, don't get me wrong, fantasy can be a useful tool. It can tell you a lot of things, so long as you've got a firm grounding in reality. You see? It's sort of like when you're writing, you know, what they used to tell us in school. You can break the rules of grammar as long as you know what they are, and you know what you're breaking. You can know the rules. You can break the rules of poetry so long as you know what they are. But unfortunately, today, because we have no faith, we have no church really. For the majority of people, in any practical sense. Because of that, people don't know the rules, you see. They don't know what reality is. And since they don't know what reality is, they're open to any sort of fancy. Now,
or as one of my teachers once said, it's one thing to build castles in the sky. It's another to go and live in them.
Precisely right. And of course, that's what we've done. We've all packed our bags and moved up there. Do you like the view? You should. You're paying for it. But the thing is that as the 19th century wore on, as life became in certain ways more and more annoying, science fiction became greater and greater, and also the possibilities that the technology opened up became a thing of speculation for.
It's interesting too that a lot of the early writers of science fiction were themselves scientists. H.G. Wells,
Yes.
Jules Verne. These were, they took scientific ideas and they speculated what would happen to them if you let them run a ways, and he came up with all kinds of very interesting ideas. And so this gave the science fantasy a respectability.
That's right. And
Now, mind you, H.G. Wells was one of the most vehement anti-Catholics that have ever come along, and a great proponent of evolution and things like that. But nonetheless, he used scientific ideas for the basis of his stories, and then.
What was interesting too, one thinks of the War of the Worlds in this case, which was of course one of the earliest and most popular looks at alien life. You remember these Martians who invaded the world, and in the movie version, of course, blew up City Hall here in L.A. with Mary Reardon in it. But notice that at the end of the book, who defeats the Martians?
Not man.
God. How? Microbes. Disease. The Martians have no resistance to our diseases, and they get wiped out. And that, which is sort of interesting, because you see he was also thinking back to historical parallels and things like that. So, of course, we know now in a way that he couldn't really have figured that if a race existed that was able to cross the depths of space, they would no doubt have ways of protecting themselves against any local diseases they'd find. We do. The answer is very simple. You just keep yourself in an airtight compartment and you don't get into it.
Yeah, one thing that he didn't he really should have ended the War of the Worlds with first the Martians all die, and then all the life on this planet dies from exposure to their bacteria. But he left that off.
Yeah, it would have made. It's an interchange, and then of course one of the Martians fleeing brings ours back to Mars. So you've got two dead worlds for the price of one. But
that story came out like at the turn of the century. Was
yeah,
it?
1899. I think.
Okay, so all the way back then, you had this fascination with the idea of invaders from outer space. And worked into that was they were superior to us.
Now, it's also good to bear in mind that at the same time, remember what had happened. Europe had conquered the world. And many, 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 many less civilized races had been defeated and colonized. In the case of the United States and Canada and Australia and New Zealand and South Africa, they'd not only been defeated, but to a great degree removed and replaced by us. This played a large, large part in the 19th century's concept of what aliens would be like. Because what on earth is the inevitable result of outsiders with greater technology visiting natives with lesser technology? Guess what happens? No one knows? Well, the savages go back to the capital city and take over the empire. No, that's not what happens. What happens is they get conquered. They get colonized. So inevitably, one can't help but think there was a sort of guilt thing going on, you see, in the collective unconscious, you might say.
Yes, we having conquered the world will now be conquered from beyond the world.
Right. And this is a motif that one way or another has continued to the present day.
Another interesting spice was added to that with the atomic age.
Yes.
The element was added. Well, all these beings out there were actually ignoring us, wishing we would just go away. Except now they've noticed, they've monitored us, and know that we have atomic power now, that we have the power to be dangerous to them. So now they're going to have to come and wipe us out or clean us up or do something. Because now we're a threat to them. We must be squished.
This was, of course, the theme of many, many great movies in the 50s, including that wonderful art piece, Plan 9 from Outer Space, my personal favorite. But
But also The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there were a ton of them that were like that, weren't there?
Mm-hmm.
And the theme is always the same. You Earthlings have become a threat to us. Now you must pay. But there was the other side, and that was the notion of the aliens coming to save us from ourselves. The aliens as saviors.
Oh, but there's even a nice twist on that. Remember the Twilight Zone? To serve man, where these creatures called the cabinets come and all they have this book called To Serve Man. And they come and they solve all our technical problems, they cure our diseases, and they start inviting us to go back to their planet on their big ships. And just at the very last minute of the story, one of our people figures out that To Serve Man is a cookbook.
Yeah, that's really one of my favorites. We're here to serve you. Yeah. Could you use flatware? I'm worth it. But it's very true. And so you've got on the one hand the notion of the alien as external threat. You also have the notion of the alien as savior. Interestingly enough, no less than what's his name? Douglas MacArthur gave a speech, I think 52 or 53, in which he said that future wars would not be between nations, but with aliens from outer space. Now, it gets more amazing. In World War II, and this is where, now mind you, all of this has gone on with a minimum of what we would call alien contact. People saw UFOs. There were stories of aliens coming out of them in the years before World War II. But in World War II, you had more people in the skies than had ever been before. And they saw things. They saw weird things. They saw peculiar things. My own father was a tail gunner in B-29s. Saw strange and peculiar things that didn't show up on the radar, that they had no explanation for, that they all saw, that they'd fire at. What were they? And then I guess it was 1948 was when that major, whose name escapes me, crashed. And from that time on, there were a bunch of strange things seen in the sky over Washington. And that was where you got the origin of the word flying saucers. Interestingly enough, one of our major Californian events in World War II, the famous Battle of Los Angeles, it is claimed by some were precipitated by UFOs. I don't mention this in my history when I cover the Battle of Los Angeles. But just to briefly recoup, you may remember that in 1942, a Japanese mini-sub shot at a oil refinery in Long Beach and missed. Then shot at another one near Santa Barbara and missed again, but did stampede cattle. So that happened. Then, it wasn't much, but it was something. Teriyaki on the hoof, you might say. So they submerged or lost to history. But it got people very, very jumpy. And they were all set for some sort of Japanese attack. Then what happened? A couple of nights later, it's a Saturday night in 1942, I think in February or March, I forget when now. Civil Defense reported craft, airships over Los Angeles. So, they cut off all the lights. They turned off the electricity. Now you can imagine what this did on a Saturday night. All of a sudden the street lamps are gone. The traffic lights are gone. Now, on a Saturday night, you can imagine the chaos that ensued. Stores were looted, and then the anti-aircraft opened up. Now, of course, to the best of our knowledge, there really wasn't anything in the skies over Los Angeles. Nothing on radar. No one else but the Civil Defense Command were aware of anything. But they opened up and fired at whatever they thought they saw. And of course, what happened was that, when you fire anti-aircraft guns, what they shoot out has to land. So it did. And this, of course, ensured for people on the ground that saw this stuff. And, if you see an anti-aircraft round land near you, you don't know that that's an American anti-aircraft round. You know what it is. The lights have gone out. There's looting. And then you see these things coming from the sky. Obviously, we're under attack. So it was a big mess. When the smoke cleared, when the sun rose, there was nothing to show for it but a lot of looted stores and smashed cars. There was just nothing. But to this day, Los Angeles Civil Defense insist that there was something over the skies of Los Angeles. Well, as I say, from that time on, got more and more and more and more and more. And now, with the invention of video cameras and things like this, people are just... I've seen them on... I love these shows like Sightings and... oh, heavens, what's that one? Strange Universe. They've got this host who's always impeccably dressed. At the end of every show, he says, "Remember, it's a strange universe out there, and we've got it covered." First time I heard that, I thought to myself, I'm glad somebody does. Boy, it's good to know somebody's in control. But it's like a friend of mine said about conspiracies. You know the good part of conspiracy theory?
What's that?
It means somebody's in charge. But anyway, the thing is that with all of this stuff going on, the invention of the video camera and so forth, lots of strange things have been captured on video. So it is, I think, indisputable that there are strange and funny things in our skies. That much, I think, would be hard to deny. What, we don't know. All right. Now let's go back to the 50s. You remember the notion of aliens as saviors? Well, in the 50s, a gentleman called George Adamski, I think about 53 or 54, claimed to have been contacted by and taken up into the craft of sort of blonde Nordic types from Venus. Not Venice, Venus. And they apparently told him that they were going to take care of all of Earth's problems and so on. I forget the message exactly. It's like Our Lady of Irwindale. These things leave a bad residue. But from there came the whole genre of contactee things. Contactee stories. Then in 1961, you have a couple called Betty and Barney Hill. The
Interrupted Journey.
Want to tell the story of the Interrupted Journey?
Oh, gosh. It's been a long time since I read the book, but they actually made quite a bundle on a book called The Interrupted Journey, where this couple claimed to have been abducted during a car trip.
From Montreal to Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
And they were separately hypnotized, and they apparently drew faces of the beings that had probed them. And the wife even described a rather strange pregnancy test where they stuck a needle in her belly button, and all these details. And I forget how did it end? Did they?
Well, I mean, basically the aliens put them back in their car and they went off. But they found when they got back to Portsmouth that there were 2 or 3 hours they couldn't account for. It was just.
Right.
My father held that there was a little place nearby called the Dewdrop Inn where they had spent those 3 hours, but they didn't want their kids to know.
But the drawings that Barney did of the aliens were the models used for Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
That's right.
Movie.
And notice,
Which is why all the aliens since then have these kind of egg-shaped heads with these big black eyes and hardly any other features.
because an awful lot of these abductee people report seeing aliens like that. Now, I have to admit, I'm not so deeply read in UFO lore that I can tell you all the different kinds, but there's supposed to be 2 or 3 different types of alien that people report. And now it's become a big deal, hypnotizing folks to get their abductee stories. And, again, as an avid watcher of things like sightings and so forth, I've seen these people with weird things that have been implanted in them that they have the sightings doctor or whomever remove. And they're bizarre metal things, alloys, unlike any we've ever seen, all this stuff. And then they regress them hypnotically. They come up with submerged memories, and I was made to mate with an alligator and things like that. Well, not that, but you get the idea. All of this stuff.
There are even groups like AA groups, only
Yes.
they're alien abductee groups. People who have mental problems now because of their abduction experiences, who get together in groups once a week and get up and say, "Yes, my name's Harold and I'm an alien abductee."
Hi, Harold!
And these people are serious.
Oh yeah, absolutely, positively. And mind you, there's the whole burgeoning field of psychology for special training for psychologists to deal with people who have this problem.
There was a movie made out of this whole thing. Was it Communion? Was that it?
Yeah, over Whitley Strieber's claimed abduction.
Right.
Whitley Strieber is a very well-known horror/science fiction writer. Well, oddly enough. Well, before his abduction, he only wrote textbooks for geometry. You go figure. But honestly, it's a strange thing. So, having said all of that, your kids are interested in it. Some of them. It's everywhere on television. It's the predication of an awful lot of pop culture.
Well, then there's another layer of stuff.
Oh boy.
There's the Chariots of the Gods.
Oh yes. Can't forget that.
Okay, and that was von Däniken?
Eric von Däniken. No, that's von Däniken.
No.
Von Däniken. Eric von Däniken.
Okay. Who wrote a book, I forget what year, it was in the early 60s, I think. Late 60s?
70s, I think.
70s? Called Chariots of the Gods. And then he had a whole bunch of follows up, more Chariots of the Gods, and even more Chariots of the Gods.
Hot Rods of the Gods.
And
Go the Chariots, that was what.
He started off with this premise that there's evidence on our planet that the planet's been invaded by aliens. They've been buying up the mineral rights since way back. And he based it on such things as the drawings in the desert, the Peruvian deserts,
The Nazca lines.
the Nazca lines, and so he would show a picture, an aerial picture of this complex set of lines, taken from I forget how many 100 feet in the air, and he'd say, "Now, doesn't this look like an airport?" And then next to it, he'd put a photograph of a major airport. And, you know, there were certain similarities, that you'd have all these lines going this way and that way. But the thing is, it sounded so convincing if you didn't know anything about those lines. But if you actually went down on the desert and looked at the lines are mostly about 4 inches wide.
Small planes?
Okay, yeah. I mean, they're very straight and they're very remarkable, but these are not runways. They're
Small
lines. They're lines drawn in a part of the desert that has so little weather that it's never weathered away. It never gets covered over with dust or anything. And the Indians obviously drew these things. However, it's not an airport. It's a bunch of lines drawn in the sand.
Why did they do it? How did they do it? This we don't know. But it wasn't an airport. And there are, however, a number of anomalies that there's a whole genre of these things.
Well, there's the cave in the Sahara Desert.
Yes.
That has this giant creature with one eyeball, kind of like this, and
Obviously an alien.
yeah, must be an alien. Now, and I think that's the one where he said there's no smoke in the cave, and yet somebody had to have had candles or torches or something to paint this thing, and yet there's no evidence of any burning materials.
And this is true of most caves.
Yeah, that's true. I'm trying to think.
There are a lot of things. For instance, now mind you, he had a whole bunch of imitators, and they'd bring up all these fun things. Like they discovered in a Chinese tomb about, I forget how old it was like 600 BC or something. They discovered an aluminum belt. Now the problem with that is that aluminum has not been used before the 19th century because the processes required to get it out of graphite just didn't exist. Why is there an aluminum belt? The famous stone dry cell battery they discovered in Baghdad. The Ashoka column in New Delhi that's made of iron that doesn't rust. Oh, there are tons of things like that. And for von Däniken, this was all proof that the aliens had run the show at some point. Left us off onto our own, and then for whatever reason the thing decayed. In other words, the evidences that apparently do exist to intimate that at some point there was an advanced civilization on this earth, he took to mean alien colonization.
Yeah, and a lot of what he wrote about, like the Nazca lines, or he also used Easter Island as an example. You know, Easter Island's that island in the Pacific where they have those huge heads, and he said there is no way that men could have ever made these things. Aliens had to make them. And yet the natives on those islands make them to this day. You know, they know how to do it.
No, they don't.
And we've got other people have gone in with cameras and filmed them doing it. So
it was all done in the soundstage in New York.
So a lot of the stuff that he threw out there was bogus, you know. And so, but you see, the problem with these kinds of things is it's presented to the public. They even did a movie called Chariots of the Gods and got Rod Serling, I think, or somebody to narrate it. So people see it and think, "Oh, this is great stuff. This is wonderful." And then when the truth comes out, that doesn't get publicized. And so you're left with this impression, oh, aliens must have done all this. Aliens must have made the Great Pyramids because human beings couldn't have made the Great Pyramids. You know,
and so it goes. And the thing with all of this is, again, as you say, it's like another layer added. And then add to that the notion that the aliens, and again, this is the more, you might say, religious element of the UFO cult. The notion that the aliens, these star creatures, these elder brothers, are perhaps, they're not really physical like us. They're entities of light who have come to show us the way.
And then you mix them all together and you get 2001.
A space idiocy.
Honestly, where what you have at the dawn of time were apes sitting around a pond, and these creatures from outer space come and leave a big black monolith, which teaches the apes how to kill. Gives them the knowledge of how to kill, and this sparks them towards becoming man. See, then the aliens come again, or they're encountered again, in the year 2001, when man has reached a point where he's ready to make the next leap. So, and there are similar stories. Like there was one called 20 million or 50 million miles to Earth or
20
something,
million years to Earth.
where
With the Martians.
Martians took apes to Mars, implanted their memories into them, and then brought them back here, and we're actually descendants of Martians, and this kind of thing. So you've stirred in evolution with extraterrestrialism, and it just gets better, you know.
And more elaborate. And of course, so then in other words, you're left with the question, several questions. Let's presume that all of this stuff is true. All right. We're gonna make a real
and
leap
this
of
is
faith.
really an alien abduction meeting here at Catholic Treasures.
My name is Charles, and I'm pregnant with an alien infant. No. Here's the
Hi, Charles.
All the men here say, "Me too." But no, the thing is that presuming all this stuff is true, and in my incarnation as pop culture icon, I would say, okay, sure, it's all true. I believe all this stuff. Then you come up with all sorts of questions. All right, are the aliens here on a voyage of exploration, or have they been here all along? Or did they come here and leave us alone for a while, and now they're coming back to check up? Or are there several different sets of them? Some of them good, some of them bad? Is it like the scramble for Africa of the 19th century? What's the whole deal? Well, any number of UFO contactees will give you answers to any number of those questions. The answers are generally not the same, but they'll still give you answers. What does it all mean for the Catholic? Well, most of it is a lot of hooey. I feel empowered.
But I thought you said we don't know for sure.
We don't know for sure. We don't know for sure about any of it. But by and large, I mean, there's some things that are simply just not possible, you know. But let's take a longer look. The first question, looking at it as a Catholic, is it possible for there to be other sentient life in space? Historically, one of the major things that's brought up in this question occurred in 792, I think, when Pope St. Zachary sat on the throne of St. Peter, and St. Vigilius was an Irishman who found his way to Austria and managed to become the first Archbishop of Salzburg. That's our cricket, it shows that summer's coming. But it's a little complex. He taught that there were probably people on the other side of the globe because they knew the world was round. You've always heard people saying, yeah, before
Well, wait,
Columbus,
they didn't know that until 1492.
Yeah, you sure, whatever. But that's exactly what you'll get. They didn't know that until 1492. Take it from me, educated people knew the world was round. How did they know the world was round? A lot of ways. One of the arguments was that a sphere is the most perfect form. Another was that if you go out to sea, things bend. Well, I'm not going to bore you with their reasons, but nevertheless they believed them. One thing that's rather interesting in this context, though, is that some of you may be aware of Dante. Remember Dante's Inferno? Well, in the Purgatorio, in Dante's setup, while hell is directly under the northern hemisphere, Purgatory is a mountain at the South Pole. It's on the other side of the world. And when Dante gets up from hell and begins the lowest rung on Purgatory, he comes up into the surface. He looks up into the sky, and he sees a constellation in the form of a cross. The Southern Cross. And he says, something people had not seen since creation began. Now, what's funny about that is that according to the scientists, and again, this may or may not be true, at some point in the past, the Southern Cross would have been visible from the Northern Hemisphere. So, where did this come from? Dante's imagination? Ancient manuscripts? Did aliens tell him? Who knows? Maybe. Someone in our group says, I told him. Well, fine, thank you. But, in truth, they knew that the world was round. So, St. Vigilius says, there are very probably people on the other side that we have yet to evangelize. This was reported back to Pope St. Zachary, as he taught that there were people on other worlds. This, according to St. Boniface, who brought the news back to St. Vigilius, was the Pope condemned. That's a very puzzling story. It's often cited, but it's hard to make a great deal of sense out of. In other words, the Pope is supposed to have condemned a misunderstanding of what St. Vigilius taught. I don't know what to say about that.
But if what he was doing was condemning the notion that there are sentient beings on other planets,
then you certainly have to take that into account. Now, having said that, Pius XII considered the possibility of sentient beings on other planets. And he ruminated a lot. He tended to ruminate. And his big question was, if such creatures exist, would they be fallen or not? How far did the fall of Satan extend? Were there other Adams on other worlds? And if so, how would they be redeemed? And so on and so forth. That was one set of questions. If such creatures existed, and if they had the technology to come here, and if they were fallen, I think Independence Day is about what we could expect. The War of the Worlds. But luckily that's not happened yet. So possibly they don't exist. Who knows? Having said all of that, scientists, as you know, assure us, that is mainstream scientists like Carl Sagan, people like that, that
billions and billions
and billions.
billions.
That's you heard his analysis of the deficit. But the thing is that they say that they find it impossible to think the distance between stars being so far that if such creatures existed on other worlds, and Sagan was sure that they did, it would be very difficult for them to come here. But he was all sure that they would one day radio us. And that's where you get Project Ozma. And all of these...
Project Asthma?
No, that's the... anyone who's lived in Los Angeles over 30 years is part of Project Ozma. We're a control group. The conspiracy's deeper than you think.
Yeah.
But no, this is, you know, they've got the machines out monitoring the skies for broadcasts from foreign worlds, you know. The Burns and Allen show and things like that. So... you know, what can one say except that from Catholic tradition, there's a very good probability that they don't exist. If they do, all sorts of theological questions are raised. But it's kind of a moot point unless and until some of them show up and you know, make themselves obvious.
Yes, but people don't wait for them to show up. People assume they exist. And the central question, of course, is, well, if Christ had to come down and suffer and die this horrible death for us, what does that mean for aliens? Okay, did he save them in the same process, or are they outside of that process? And you see, it's just another one of those things that whittles away at our assumptions as Catholics.
Precisely right. Because, of course, in a sense, you come down to the thing, after all, if aliens could be saved outside the church, guess what? I suppose invincible alienness would be a new doctrine. But, yep, can't help being a Martian, buddy. Yeah. You know, there have been a couple of these alien stories of the aliens, you know, they're technological, but they're just not that bright. Another one where they're simply rude. They think that the mode of address to an earthling, if it's male, is Mac, and if it's female, it's Toots. And you can imagine how far that gets them. And they do invade, by the way. Yeah. Anyway, so all of that being said, there isn't a great deal that one could say about much more one could say about aliens per se, theologically. You know, A, the likelihood is that they don't exist, qua aliens, and B, if they do, then there are all kinds of questions, and C, probably, since there's no practical use to the question, since there's a great deal of emphasis in it, today, you could be assured that one of the reasons for that emphasis is to whittle away, as you say, our faith. Because, again, I'll spend my whole time charting UFOs and I won't worry about things like mass. That's how those things often work. Having said that, there are other possible explanations for these phenomena. I can think of two. So we're doing time-wise.
Well, we're approaching the end of an hour.
Oh, boy. Well, how close to the end of the hour are we?
Well, we got about 9 minutes to go.
All right, well, then we can get launched to the first explanation. The first explanation is that they are demons. Now, this has been proposed by a number of people precisely because of the effect they have in wearing away the faith and getting people's interests in that area. I think the first and most, how do I put it? The first and most graphic illustration of this idea was in one of Emmett Culligan's books. You know Emmett Culligan?
Yeah, hey, Culligan, man.
Hey, Culligan, man. Well, he wrote a number of apocalyptic books, including The Last World War and The End of Time. And like all such books, they're kind of out of date because, it's 1998. And he was sure it was going to happen a lot sooner. It didn't. But one of the things that he said there was one of his kids asked him, well, what about UFOs, Dad? He thought for a minute and he said, and this is the quote, gosh, I love it, "There are warplanes in the Air Force of Satan." Satan's Air Force. And I had this vision of jets, with S instead of the things, a demon with goggles on and a scarf. But what's to be said? Well, there are a number of things in favor of this idea, a number of things against it. The emphasis on things sexual that a lot of these conductee stories have reminds one a great deal of certain stories in the Middle Ages, which we'll talk about a little bit more detailed afterwards. The general feeling of a universe without God that these sort of stories, without providence, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. All of this, to many people, sort of stenches of the demonic. Again, you get into a strange field, because of course there are demons, there are demons. You know how there's supposed to be as many different kinds of angels as there are angels. Well, doubtless the same is true of fallen angels. So, when you say demons, and you just say, well, it's demons, what exactly does that mean? But certainly the focus on UFOs has been a source of loss of faith for many, 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 many people. Kind of like the temperance movement was. Why do I bring that up? Well, there's temperance and UFOs. It's funny, all of these old ladies who won't drink booze but watch for UFOs. No, it's not that. It's simply lesser things obscuring the good. There's a famous poem in Boston about the old Unitarian lady who sees this Irishman lying drunk in the gutter. And she says, and here's the poem, "How can the incarnation be part of Christian revelation in the face of such intoxication?" In light of such intoxication, that's it. Well, and that's what it comes down to. How can the church be true if aliens are coming from, and obviously anything that would strengthen that, such as real abductions and so forth, that would tend to strengthen it. But there are a few problems with this whole idea. The one is that, as a rule, Satan has kind of a limited number of tricks up his sleeve. And the demonologists of the Middle Ages worked long and hard on cataloging them. And there ain't nothing like the UFO myth. Nothing. Not as far as demonic activity goes. That's a very important thing.
What, you mean he can't come up with a new idea?
No.
Why not?
Because he can't. He's very limited. He can't create.
But he can't come up with a new strategy?
No. Besides, the ones he's got are already pretty good. I mean, from his point of view. Let me emphasize that. I mean, again, we're purely speculating here, but it seems very strange that he would come up with something new this late in the game.
Well, but we're at a point in history where we have the loss of reason, the growth of imagination. We have people who are yearning for something to replace what's been tossed aside.
No, I mean, he might very well invent a new false religion.
Well, that's basically what this UFO business becomes for some of these people, is a false religion.
No?
And I don't see why it isn't beyond him to have the high priest of the new religion showing up in fiery chariots.
Well, that's true, but again, all his wonders are lying wonders. I mean, again, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying there are problems with it.
Mm-hmm.
Every theory that will be propounded tonight has problems with it. That's what I told you from the beginning. Nothing you will hear tonight is definitive. Yes, ma'am?
You know how Solange Hertz feels that the discovery of the use of electricity has opened up a whole demonic thing for our century, including the television, the telephone, the telegraph.
And you know,
everything that
it may
runs-
even be true.
Yeah, that's her theory, that everything that is electronically...
In all of these areas, in all of these areas, for our friends in Radioland, the lady has made reference to Mrs. Solange Hertz's theory that the invention of electricity opened up the door for all sorts of demonic activity. The television, the telegraph, the telephone.
Those are certainly new
and-
things that were never in the Dark Ages.
This is true, and it's a good point. I mean, she also, the same author points out the evil influences of heliocentrism on our culture and our faith and so on. And I mean, these are all areas in which it's good to speculate, but it's hard to lay down hard and fast rules. I mean, one could reply that Saint Louis Marie de Montfort declared that the saints of the latter days would fly through the air. Now, obviously, that must needs be a reference to airplanes. But the problem is that airplanes have brought a lot of evil in their track as well. Similarly, the building of the superhighways,
But they're in different things, really. It's the use one.
It's- but that's the whole point. The problem is, being fallen, man inevitably finds the worst things he can turn things to. I mean, take for instance the internet. Now, here's a brilliant tool for getting all kinds of information you simply could not get any other way. Now, what is the largest single use of the internet for? Anyone care to hazard a guess? Porno. Absolutely. You could get all kinds of things on the internet. I myself found a website dedicated to the Guanches, that mysterious race of the Canary Islands, conquered and converted by the Spanish. Fascinating people. You only see little references to them in encyclopedias. I found a whole website filled with everything I'd ever wanted to know about the Guanches. Well, that's the kind of stuff you can find if you know where to look. And what are people busy doing? They're looking up Kitty's Attic, or whatever. I don't know, is that the name of a site? I don't know.
I don't know.
And it's not just
I
porno.
don't cruise the net.
Oh, I know, just Whittier Boulevard. But and I said that in front of his fiancée, fans, oh well. But
And she laughed.
and she laughed. That's it. Well, she's seen him cruise Whittier Boulevard. Pathetic sight, but never mind. Anyway, seriously though, anything can be turned to ill. Anything. And then the question is, where does the ill lay? In the thing itself or in the user? And the argument can always be made on both sides. And this is why, I mean, it's the church, notice, has many, many different answers to any given question that isn't strictly dogmatic. The unmarried virginal life is best, so St. Paul tells us. And yet there's no greater defender of the family than the church. No greater encourager or sanctifier of marriages. So much so that she fights divorce. All the while saying that virginity is superior. Because it's not for everybody, any more than marriage is for anyone. And very often in these arguments, like television, good or bad, you come up to the same sort of thing. Television can be bad, it can be good. Is there something inherently evil in television? Quite possible. One thinks of Anne Catherine Emmerich and her little black boxes in which Satan would speak. Now, if you can imagine a little nun in the early 19th century having a vision of some soap opera blaring out to a family from, can you imagine what can you imagine? And no narration in her vision, mind you. No context, just these people. I mean, she'd be...
Is that on the screen or the people watching?
Hard to tell. I mean, this would be... So again, unfortunately, with the growth of technology, we have entered into an era where there are tons and tons of questions and very few hard and fast answers. This is why, of course, one has to say parenthetically, it becomes all the more important to focus upon the answers we do have. Because regardless of whether or not there's television or the internet or this or that, you've still got to be baptized, you still got to receive communion. These things are definite. To the degree that it falls to your lot to have to manipulate these things, well, then you use them as best you can. I mean, tonight we are having this talk under an electric light. We're not sitting here with candles. I was at a liturgical conference, the Diocesan Liturgical Conference, and one of the priests got up and said that liturgy has to reflect the life of people as it's led, and that it simply isn't possible to have a real Tridentine Mass today because of the use of electric lights.
What in the world?
Well, see, the people amongst whom the Tridentine light grew up didn't have electric lights.
So is that why they put candles on the altar?
Well, yeah, but see, in most churches that have Tridentine Masses, you do use electric lights as well. And his point was that if you really wanted to have a Tridentine Mass, you wouldn't use electric lights. So I said to him afterwards that since we were trying to get back to the early church, we should dispense with the collection, since this is a tradition which has come later and is certainly a violation. And he told me I didn't really understand what he was getting at. And I thought I did, but it shows you. Anyway.
Well, but as for the how you put things to use, you use a computer to write your articles.
Continually.
You've used a computer to write your books.
Yep.
My little book on the Blessed Virgin Mary was written on a computer.
Yep.
And was typeset on a computer.
Like your novels.
Which are unpublished.
But are wonderful.
But that's another story. But nonetheless, you can take something that, if it is inherently evil, it's been turned to good. At least in some instances that we know.
And yet one can't help but think of Shakespeare's Cassius and Julius Caesar talking to Brutus. And in the midst of their conversation, one or the other of them, I forget which, talks about doubtless their stars have led them to this dreadful fate. The other says, the problem is not in our stars, but in ourselves. And very possibly the problem is not in our internet, not in our telephone, not in our television. Very possibly, ladies and gentlemen, the problem is in ourselves. No, it can't be.
Speaking of Shakespeare, didn't he also say something about being beware of that lean and hungry look?
And they're getting it.
They're getting it because they saw that wonderful cake in the next room that's waiting to be eaten.
Take 10.
So,
if you gotta meet them,
you got to use Shakespeare. Anyway, so we'll see you in 10.
Brush up your Shakespeare. La 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 la. That means you people. Come in, come in.
Come on, we're going to have a close encounter of the fourth kind.
What? Look out for your key. Or your whistle. All right.
It's on.
If you'll be seated, ladies and gentlemen.
We'll continue with our talk.
All right.
Okay.
Have a seat. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the second part of this alien abduction. We are taking you to planet Zargaz.
You didn't realize this bookstore was actually a spaceship.
But it is.
Came on board. We have been traveling at an average speed of 237 million light years per second. And if you're feeling a little woozy, that's why.
Are we entering a friendly system, Captain?
Absolutely not.
Shall I put on our force fields?
The Zargons are particularly hungry.
Oh, boy. Phaser banks loaded and ready.
But that was another popular theme in some of these Twilight Zones and Outer Limits is people get on board an ordinary carnival type spaceship thinking they're just going to go for a little whirl in a carnival spaceship, and it turns out it's a real spaceship and they have been abducted and now they're on another planet. There
was a great cartoon I saw in the New Yorker one time that showed this little tiny flying saucer had landed on somebody's lawn. And there was this group of little tiny aliens about yay big marching out of it. And this kid has come out, he said it's in the backyard, this kid has come out the back porch and he's looking. And he says, "Oh, don't worry, Ma, it's nothing." And the caption was, "The boy who cried sheep." But, so, never you mind. As you recall, we've just spoken of the aliens as demons. Now we'll look at a couple of other possibilities for what they might be. How many here have heard of Carl Gustav Jung?
My leader.
Oh, very good. They're either too Jung or too Freud. Well,
fairy tales can come true.
Get
Can happen to you if you're young at heart.
Oh, gosh. It's worse. Well, at any rate, yes, bad psychological songs with your hosts. No, Carl Jung had a very interesting theory about UFOs. Now, this isn't too surprising because Carl Jung had interesting theories about virtually every aspect of modern life.
He was a Nazi.
What does that mean?
What does that
He
mean?
was Swiss, and unlike the vast majority of people who said that, it was true in his case. But, I am Swiss. I've been a lifelong inhabitant of Argentina since 1946. But I have never lived anywhere else. But here, no, Jung had, as I say, some rather interesting theories, and the one that is sort of germane here. He was the great pioneer of the thought that there was a thing called the collective unconscious. Now, what's the collective unconscious, and why am I bothering with it? Well, for Jung, the collective unconscious was the sort of psychic underpinning of all human beings everywhere. In a sense, you might say he would hold that we were all dipping unconsciously into the same sort of psychic reservoir. That's why you'll have people who are completely uneducated and don't know from nothing, and yet they'll dream in mythological symbols and things like that they would have no access to otherwise. He would maintain that the universality of these things is always pull a face if an unauthorized picture is being made. That way you'll end up in Spy magazine. But in truth, the thing was, Jung was of the opinion that the UFO phenomenon was a psychological phenomenon, not a physical one. And that, in a sense, these were, you remember all the underpinnings, the historical underpinnings we were looking at, that in a sense this was sort of a mass neurosis, in a manner of speaking, which was sort of cooked up to compensate for all of the changes in modern life. And you must understand also that for Jung, just because it came from the depths of the unconscious didn't mean it was an illusion in the sense that such a thing would be for Freud. He was of the opinion that these things can almost take on a life of their own if enough people think hard enough about them. Don't know if that's true, but I know it's certainly true of ad campaigns. At any rate, think of how many people write into soap opera characters, Little Nancy, the woman who's just lost her home and her husband has gone off and, oh, it's awful, and you can tune in to as the stomach turns and see her adventures. And the woman gets letters by the ton, not to the actress, but to the character. Oh, poor Nancy, I was so horrified when so-and-so left you, and I'm sorry. If there's anything you can do, here's my number, call me, we'll talk.
Well, yeah, Robert Young once said the same thing about his character Marcus Welby. Mm-hmm. He was flooded with requests for medical advice written to Marcus Welby, M.D. It's strange.
You can imagine what happened to George Burns after he played God.
Yeah.
But no, it's people. They do have a way of making these things sort of semi-real, in a manner of speaking, and that basically was Jung's notion, is that it was a vast illusion, and that the People were seeing these things because they need to see them. They either, and again, remember the two foci we've had, either the saviors or the punishers. Those are the two elements here. As people needed either a savior or a punisher, so that's what they think they see. That's what they think they're experiencing. Is this true? Who knows? Might be, partly, some of it. It might account for some of these things. Because remember, there's a very complex phenomenon. It's like a huge stew with all kinds of stuff coming in and going out. Remember that, as we said earlier, none of what we're saying this evening in terms of explanations might be true. There's also the possibility that they're all true, to a degree, in some way or other. You see what I mean?
Well, look at the myths spun by Walt Disney.
Well,
And everybody believes in them.
well, you see, now Disney, it's interesting you should bring up Disney, because, again, Jung was very much of the opinion that what we're seeing in the 20th century is what he called the victory of the mass mind. And that Disney certainly represented that to an incredible degree. The homogenization of legends and their repackaging is selling stuff. It's interesting, this is all parenthetical, but of course via one of those sci-fi shows that Disney handles. Are they tied in with the Star Wars franchise now?
I don't know.
Well, anyway, they've got one of them, and of course they had what's his face, Michael Jackson, as Captain EO. Yes, they are tied into the Star Wars thing, and it's all done like Disney does anything, authentic, only not. You know, if you've ever been to Disneyland, you've been to Main Street, USA. And that's Disney's. No, everyone's smiling guiltily. Yes, I've been there. I went shopping at the Main Street Emporium, and it was great. I got this hat. Yes, fine. But the Disney view of things is sort of interesting. You know that Disney has bought out 42nd Street in New York. Talk about art entertaining life. And they're evicting various of the businesses that were there. They're getting rid of all the porno shops. And there's a very interesting thing. A friend of mine was down there, and he saw this porno shop that apparently had been in business for 30 years. And they had a big sign out saying, "Thanks, neighbors, for 30 wonderful years." And it's a porno shop. You know, it's like the corner blacksmith shop going out of business.
It's New York.
And what do you want? But so getting rid of that, and that's good. But of course, what's going to replace it? Disney's 42nd Street. Well, I don't know worse, but certainly it won't be real, you know? Disney planned to do the same thing with Hollywood Boulevard. Now, I actually know Hollywood Boulevard a lot better than I know 42nd Street. And I grew up on Hollywood Boulevard, very close by. And, you know, it's a weird thing because now, of course, it's a dump and a horrible slum. When I was a boy, it was a very nice street with lots of shops and Pickwick Books and Morrison's men's store and the Broadway and all this stuff. It was a real and what? Ciro's. Well, that was on Sunset further down, but the whole area it was a living place. Okay, so then it falls apart, goes to pieces. Disney buys it. They'll get rid of all the slime, but see, it won't be alive. See. They may have a bookstore, but it'll be like the bookstores in Disneyland. It'll be, I don't know if I'm making myself clear. So similarly, Disney was able to do the same kind of thing with folklore. Believe it or not, there was a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, there was a Cinderella, there was a Sleeping Beauty, before Disney ever came along. And yet now you cannot think of those things apart from Disney. Now, mind you, I enjoyed every one of them. I enjoyed The Sword and the Stone. They're great entertainment, a lot of fun. But unfortunately, just as I no doubt will prefer their Hollywood Boulevard to the Hollywood Boulevard we've got now, just as probably will prefer the modern 42nd Street to porno 42nd Street. There's still something lost there. To compensate for that, Jung would say, we've created the UFO phenomenon. So that's the psychological theory.
Well, there's another way we can compensate for it. I saw an ad for a new Sigourney Weaver movie called Snow White the Grimm version.
Oh,
And
really?
it says, "You were terrified of Sigourney Weaver in Alien Resurrection. Now see Snow White."
That's scary.
And the picture is really scary.
Do you think she plays the witch or Snowy?
I don't know.
That's,
But there's other ways of combating Disney
well,
influences.
that's certainly true. Well, you know, unfortunately, my family being as they are, the first time I saw Snow White, I came home and, you know, I said, oh, I saw it. My dad says, well, you notice you didn't see the other 7 dwarves. And I said, what? He said, the ones they don't show you, the ones they keep hidden. I said, what are they? And, you know, his sleazy, nasty. These are the ones that they keep really locked up. And I said, do you think Snow White encountered them? And he said, would she have told you if she had?
You know, speaking of your family, you know, I found this book in Romans months and months ago, and it's called The Day After Roswell. And as you probably know, Mr. Coulombe went to school in Roswell at the New Mexico Military Institute.
Now I'm school for space cadets.
And yes, it's and so I in fact I used this in one of my talks when I was here by myself. But may I share the inscription?
Please.
Because the book is called The Day After Roswell, and I gave it to him on the 8th of November. So I wrote, the 8th of November, the day after Roswell. Now we know.
And this is
your life.
the truth is out.
And the commander of the spaceship that brought you here is waiting just in the next room. And
Steve?
Yeah.
Oh my.
Old
Steve Franchini is the commander of the starship?
Captain Steve. You know?
Captain Steve. We're very informal in outer space.
Right.
Brian's
So anyway.
first mate.
I had Brian's first mate. And the good ship lollipop. Well, I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. This is getting scary. But no, he did give me this for my birthday. I should tell you that the old Plains Theater in Roswell, where I used to see such quality films as Serial and things like that, is now one of their 2 UFO museums. So that's something. And you know, the funny thing is, because I went to college in Roswell, I have people come up to me, not a joke, at least once a week, if I let loose in a group that I went to college in Roswell. Oh, you went to college in Roswell? Oh, what do you think about the UFO? You know, as if going to college there would mean a thing. You know, and then...
Well, let me point out that though this book is by Colonel Philip J. Corso, the foreword, which gives credence to this book, is by Senator Strom Thurmond.
That's right. The oldest man in Congress. Yeah.
And he says right here.
What's he say there?
You'd do a better Strom Thurmond than I would, I think. But
Wow. Forward, Senator Strom Thurmond. When I was first elected to the United States Senate in 1954,
Slower.
well, I guess he would say it so, wouldn't he? When I was first elected to the United States Senate in 1954, the United States and democratic Western governments were locked in a bitter and sometimes deadly Cold War with totalitarian communist governments that sought to expand their bankrupt ideology throughout the world. Though those who did not live during this era have a hard time picturing it, the 1950s and 1960s were a period in our history when there was a very real need to be concerned about a communist, especially a Soviet, threat to our security and institutions. As a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I took a lead role in seeking out those in our government who sought to muzzle military personnel who wanted to alert Americans to the threats we faced from our communist enemies and to speak out against some of the plainly misguided, incorrect, and frankly, dangerous. This is a revelation, frankly. Policies of the United States in dealing with the Soviets and Red Chinese. Distinguished officers and patriotic men such as Admiral Arleigh Burke and General Arthur Trudeau were essentially censored by their own government because of the views they espoused about the state of the world and the nature of the threat before our nation. As a veteran of World War II, a commissioned officer in the United States Army Reserve, and a proponent of a strong and comprehensive military, I could not sit idly by and watch our military be undermined by people in government who are sympathetic to communism.
You notice this has a lot to do with UFOs.
But it's a lot of fun. I feel like I'm going back in time. It's great. No, you're wrong. You're wrong. He gets into it right here.
Okay.
During this period, the Armed Services Committee held extensive hearings into this matter. It seemed an alien concept. Told you. Has a lot to do with UFOs. You gotta read between the lines. Strom knows. It seemed an alien concept that in a nation that protects and cherishes free expression, the men who risk their lives. Gosh, there's nothing else about aliens in the whole bloody thing. Fine. I've wasted that time. Anyway.
Well, no. You don't fast judge him here, because he goes on about the Korean War and a bunch of other stuff, but then right down here now.
Okay.
1963. Right down there, 1963.
Oh gosh. In 1963, when I learned of Colonel Corso's impending retirement from the Army, I thought that having a man with his background and experiences on my staff would be of great benefit. So after offering him a position that promised nothing more than a long hours of hard work and a modest salary, Philip Corso once again willingly went to work serving and protecting the United States, this time as an aide in my office. There is no question that Philip Corso has led a full and adventurous life. Well, I'm sure that's true. And I'm certain that he has many interesting stories to share with individuals interested in military history, espionage, and the workings of our government. We should all be grateful that there are men and women like Colonel Corso, people who are willing to dedicate their lives to serving the nation and protecting the ideals we all hold dear. And we should honor the sacrifices they have made in their careers and their lives.
Now notice nowhere in there does he say that he believes that aliens... See, what this book does is give a case that all our modern technology, the laser, I think IC chips, Velcro, just about everything, came... Well, not Velcro, but most of the stuff came off of the alien ship that crash landed...
Water?
No, not for... But that crash landed at Roswell, that all this stuff we didn't invent. It was all alien technology.
You mean we'd still be living in 1949?
Yes. So to get the senator to write this accolade of the author, and yet it's clever the way he does it. He goes on and on about himself, says this is a great man, but keeps himself completely detached from the subject of the book. It's almost as if he wrote it. He could have written it for any book.
My book. And and there's the great part about it too.
Yeah, your book. Every man today
call Rome. And I'm sure
that Senator Strom Thurmond writing the introduction.
Mr. Coulombe served in our armed forces, and I know that he has many interesting things to say. Well, he says interesting things to say here. That could mean anything. That's great. I mean, it's insane, but it's wonderful. No, this God, it's great. And of course they have it looks good because at the bottom, forward by Senator Strom Thurmond. I love that. He was the first man my mother ever voted for president. So we have a connection there. Strom Thurmond for president.
Tells us more than you know. Anyway.
More than I want to know. But at any rate, the thing is, so there's those possibilities. There is one other possibility which people don't generally look at, but I must say, to the degree that anyone can come up with any sense out of this whole bizarre topic, there is another possibility, which suggests itself if you are familiar with the European folklore of the past 10 centuries. It's just this, that the UFO people are fairies. I don't mean they came from West
Alien
Hollywood.
abduction stories.
And they gave me a pregnancy test. Well, it gets worse and worse. Now, what do I mean by fairies? Well, I have something to read to you. See, all I do is say the word fairy and everybody laughs, It's sort of like this Irish comedian was on his a television program. He was trying to tell an ethnic joke. I saw this. It was very sad. He says, well, it seems that there were these two Irishmen, and then all of a sudden you hear these voices from off stage. What you doing talking about the Irish? You're Irish yourself, you dog. Why don't you come up with some... And all right, well, it seems that there were these two Pakistanis. Oh, you're talking about the Pakistanis? Well, that's fine. Oh, heavens, I'll talk about my own people. It seems that there were these two Englishmen, a traitor to his own race. And finally he said, fine, I'll talk about a mythical race. There were these two fairies, and the cameraman says, so what if we are? Leave us alone. That's how it goes. But I want you to put all that out of your mind. Yes, he gets a hold of the good chip lollipop indeed. No, this is something I'd like you to hear. It comes from St. Jerome in his Life of St. Paul, the first hermit.
Whose feast day we celebrated recently.
That's correct. St. Anthony, says he, set on a journey to visit St. Paul. After traveling several days, he met a centaur. You know what a centaur is, ladies and gentlemen? It's the half horse, half man in Greek mythology. Remember that? Of whom he inquired the hermit's abode. Whereupon the centaur, growling some uncouth and scarcely intelligible answer, pointed out the direction with his outstretched hand, and then fled with the utmost speed into a wood. The holy abbot kept on his way, and in a dean, that's like a dell, a little hollow, met a little man, almost a dwarf, with taloned hands, horned brow, and his lower extremities ending in the feet of a goat. At such a sight, St. Anthony stood still, and fearing the arts of the devil, comforted himself with the great sign of the cross. But, far from running away, or even seeming frightened at it, the little fellow respectfully approached the old man, and tendered him, as it were, a peace offering, dates as refreshment for his journey. The blessed St. Anthony, having then inquired who he was, quote, I am a mortal, replied he, and one of the inhabitants of this wilderness, whom the pagans, in their many blind errors, worship under the names of fauns, or satyrs, or incubi. I am on a mission for my people. We beg thee to pray for us under the common God, whom we know to have come for the salvation of the world, and whose praises are sounded all over the earth. Rejoicing exceedingly at the glory of Christ, St. Anthony, turning his face toward Alexandria, and striking the ground with his staff, cried out, Woe be unto thee, thou harlot city, who worshipest animals as gods. Such is the narrative of St. Jerome, who dwells at length on the fact, explaining its import in an ample discourse. And then this theologian, by the way, is Lodovico Sinistrari, who lived in the 17th century, famous Franciscan writer of the period. It were indeed rash to doubt the truth of the above recital, constantly referred to by the greatest of the doctors of the Holy Church, St. Jerome, whose authority no Catholic will ever deny. Let us therefore investigate these circumstances, which most clearly confirm our opinion. Firstly, we observe that if ever a saint was assailed by the arts of the demon, saw through his infernal devices, and carried off victories and trophies from the contest, that saint was St. Anthony, as is shown by his life written by St. Athanasius. Now, since in that little man St. Anthony did not recognize a devil, but an animal, saying, quote, Woe be unto thee, thou harlot city, who worshipest animals as gods, it is clear that it was no devil or pure spirit ejected from heaven and damned, but some kind of animal. Still more, St. Anthony, when instructing his friars and cautioning them against the assaults of the demon, said to them, as related in the Roman Breviary, 17 January, Believe me, my brethren, Satan dreads the vigils of pious men, their prayers, fasts, voluntary poverty, compassion, and humility. But above all, he dreads their burning love of our Lord Jesus Christ, at the mere sign of whose most holy cross he flies away disabled. Unquote. Believe me, my brethren, Satan dreads the vigils of pious men, their prayers, fasts, voluntary poverty, compassion, and humility. But above all, he dreads their burning love of our Lord Jesus Christ, at the mere sign of whose most holy cross he flies away disabled. Unquote. As the little man against whom St. Anthony guarded himself with the sign of the cross neither took fright nor fled, but approached the saint confidently and humbly, offering him some dates, it is a sure sign that he was no devil. Secondly, we must observe that the little man said, I also am a mortal, whence it follows that he was an animal subject to death, and consequently called into being through generation. For an immaterial spirit is immortal because simple, and consequently is not called into being through generation from pre-existent matter, but through creation, and consequently also cannot lose it through the corruption called death. Its existence can only come to an end through annihilation. Therefore, when he said he was mortal, he professed himself an animal. Thirdly, we must observe that he acknowledged he knew that the God of all had suffered in human flesh. Those words show him to have been a rational animal, for brutes know nothing but what is sensible and present, and can therefore have no knowledge of God. If that little man said that he and his fellows were aware that God had suffered in human flesh, it shows that, by means of some revelation, he must have acquired the knowledge of God, as we have ourselves the revealed faith. That God assumed human flesh and suffered in it is the essence of the two principal articles of our faith: the existence of God, one and threefold, his incarnation, passion, and resurrection. All that shows, as I said, that it was a rational animal, capable of the knowledge of God through revelation, like ourselves, and endowed with a rational and consequently immortal soul. Fourthly, we must observe that in the name of his whole race, whose delegate he professed to be, he besought St. Anthony to pray for them to the common God of all. Whence I infer that the little man was capable of salvation and damnation, and that he was not in termino but in via, that is, not at the end but on the road. For, from his being, as has been shown above, rational and consequently endowed with an immortal soul, it follows that he was capable of salvation and damnation, the proper lot of every rational creature, angel or man. I likewise infer that he was on the way, in via, that is, capable of merit and demerit. For if he had been at the goal, in termino, he would have been either blessed or damned. Now, he could be neither the one nor the other. For St. Anthony's prayers, to which he commended himself, could have been of no assistance to him if finally damned, and if actually saved, he stood in no need of them. Since he commended himself to the saints' prayers, it shows they could be available to him, and consequently that he was on the way to salvation in statu viae et meriti. Fifthly, we must observe that the little man professed to be delegated by others of his kind, when saying, "I am on a mission for my race," words from which many inferences may be deduced. One is that the little man was not alone of his kind, an exceptional and solitary monster, but there were many of the same species, since congregating they made up a race, and that he came in the name of all, which could not have been, had not the will of many been represented by and centered in him. Another is that those animals lead a social life, since one of them was sent in the name of many. Another is that although living in the wilderness, it is not assigned to them as a permanent abode, for St. Anthony having never previously been in that desert, which was far distant from his hermitage, they could not have known who he was, nor how great his degree of sanctity. It was therefore necessary that they should have become acquainted with him elsewhere, and consequently that they should have traveled beyond that wilderness. Lastly, we must observe that the little man said he was one of those whom the pagans, blinded by error, call fauns or satyrs or incubi, and by these words is shown the truth of our principal proposition, that incubi are rational animals, capable of salvation and damnation. Now, the book he's writing, Demoniality, was written to answer a big question in the Middle Ages, which was just that, about the fairies. Since that word always brings us such mirth, because we think of West Hollywood, we'll use something less amusing. What would be good? Elves, spirits?
Elves, or the wee folk.
The wee folk. What's that?
Demons.
No.
He uses that.
He doesn't use, he is very, very clean, very, very careful to point out that when he says demon here, he doesn't mean it in the Latin, but the Greek sense. Demones. So calling them demons won't be helpful, for the same reason we can't call them fairies. It doesn't work. Now, we'll call them sprites.
The little people.
The little people, the wee folk.
Yeah.
Only not so wee. It was a big question, because as you know, they run throughout European folklore. And they have many, many, I mean, this isn't the only account, by the by, of a saint dealing with them. It's a very, very interesting study, and one that's been, shall we say, neglected these days. But the scholastics who dealt with them.
Man is so prone to wanting to believe myths.
Well, because he's one himself. Look at President Clinton. But the thing is, it was the assertion of the medieval writers on the topic that wherever these creatures came from, or whatever they were, some of them were good, some of them were evil. And the stories that were told about the evil ones are very much like those of the UFO creatures. Abductions, lies. You know, sure, well, let's see, what are people into these days? Aliens? I come from Pluto. That's it. And also, they asserted that they were made of subtle matter. There's a phrase you haven't heard. But subtle matter, before St. Thomas and the Aristotelians came in, subtle matter was what folk like St. Bonaventure and the Church Fathers and all that believed that spirits were constructed of. Matter of some sort that isn't like ours, because it allowed them to do things that we can't do. And in fact, Nicaea too defined just that. The Second Council of Nicaea, it was defined that spirits are made of this stuff, this subtle matter. That was a surprise for y'all. I'll give you a quote on it. I never want to have you take my word for these things. But while I'm finding it, I should say that one of the things that the fathers of Nicaea II pointed to was the point in Genesis, where it speaks of the sons of God and the daughters of men. This couldn't refer to the angels, obviously, who don't reproduce and aren't born. So they figured it referred to these sorts of creatures. Now, mind you, none of this is driven in stone. But if one wants to look at an alternative for whatever reality there may be to the UFO phenomenon, if in fact there is any, we might as well look to our own tradition first, before we start looking out to the stars. And again, having read an awful lot of this sort of stuff, it's the old legends and so on, it's amazing to me how similar they are. Anyway, this at the fifth sitting of Nicaea II, a book was introduced by John of Thessalonica against a pagan philosopher, wherein occur the following propositions. And I have to tell you that the book was inserted into the council and passed, which I'll read you in a minute. Quote, respecting angels, archangels, and their powers, to which I also adjoin our own souls, the Catholic Church is indeed of opinion that they are intelligences, but not entirely bodiless and senseless, as you Gentiles affirm. She, on the contrary, ascribes to them a subtle body, aerial or igneous, according to what is written. He makes his angels spirits and his ministers a burning fire. And later, although not corporeal in the same way as ourselves, made of the four elements, yet it is impossible to say that angels, demons, and souls are incorporeal, for they have been seen many a time wearing their own body by those whose eyes the Lord had opened. Unquote. And after that book had been read through before all the fathers in council assembled, Theresias, the Patriarch of Constantinople, submitted to the approval of the council with these words, quote, the Father showeth that the angels should be pictured since their form can be defined, and they have been seen in the shape of men. Without a dissentient, the synod answered, yea, my Lord. Well, where does all this leave us? Where we began. In truth, there is no universally admissible proof of UFOs. There is no certainty that anything is happening, and yet something seems to be happening. Where there's smoke, there's fire. One has to admit that the explanations the government give are sometimes a bit lacking. There's a theory, for instance, that what really went down at Roswell was some sort of secret machine that the government were working on, rather than a UFO. And that's why they've been so closed-mouthed about it. Some even say that people like Corso have been spreading this story about UFOs precisely to keep the public attention away from whatever it was that really crashed there. The government recently, there's been this stuff about alien bodies at Roswell. Remember the alien autopsy? Mm-hmm. You have no idea how strange it was seeing Cousin Zargon, there on TV being cut into. But you remember Cousin Zargon, you met him. But the Army then said that probably it were some test dummies they had released from an airplane in 1952. But all this happened in 1948. Where does this come from? What does this mean? Why are they telling us this? It's all fascinating.
Simple time warp.
Thank you, Mr. Feeney. It's all cleared up. It was a time warp. Thank you. I feel so much better now. But again, all of these things, there are two things you should remember about them. One, they're fascinating. Two, you'll never come to the bottom of them, and they're very distracting. You will never, ever, ever figure out what the real story is. It's sort of like, for some people, it isn't UFOs, it's the Kennedy assassination.
I'd like to add my 2 cents.
Okay.
Okay. Because the way this usually, I said it before, there's this underlying thing that's thrown out and put in our face, as it were. How can you be so, it would be the height of pride to say that man is the center of the universe, that we're the only sentient beings here. And, the way I look at it, personally, is that the the universe was made as the setting for the earth.
The human drama.
When we say, oh, but why, since the earth is so tiny, would God make this universe that goes on and 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 on? Well, there's two reasons why. One is because it was fitting. Just simply fitting that God, if he was going to make a jewel and set it. I mean, when you have a diamond, you don't just stick a diamond on a tabletop, or you don't just I mean, you put it in a setting. You put gold around it. You put other stones around it. You surround it with things that draw attention to the diamond itself. Well, that's what God was doing with the earth. He made a universe as a setting for this jewel, where he was going to conduct this grand experiment. Okay, and if that explanation doesn't appeal to you, well, ask any physicist who knows anything about nuclear reactions and so on, and they will tell you that the reason that our sun burns at the temperature it does is because all chemical reactions have a certain efficiency, and if this efficiency is based on the interrelated nature of all matter. And the reason things are as efficient as they are is because there is that much matter out there. If there was more matter in the universe, all our chemical reactions would be more efficient, the sun would burn hotter, and last a shorter period of time. If there was less matter out there in the whole universe, the sun would burn slower, and things would be colder, and things would be slower. So the reason that things are the way they are is because the universe is as big as it is. You know, for God to make this planet where water covers the surface, most of the surface, in liquid form and isn't frozen throughout, and it's just the right temperature and so on, he needed to make all of that. And any physicist will tell you that that's true. I mean, I'm not making this up. You need all of that for this, what we know as our world, to exist the way it does. Right? So you don't have to be ashamed to say man, is the only cognizant physical life form. You don't have to say, oh, it's the height of pride. In fact, the whole concept of God making this place, this earth, is humbling to me.
And there is an added thing there.
Yeah.
And that is that, the temptation in the light of the unknown is always, for some reason, to doubt the truths we know of Revelation in the light of what has just been discovered. So, when it's discovered that there were big-boned lizards and things like that, well, obviously Genesis can't be true. It just can't be. When it was discovered that the earth goes around the sun, well then, obviously the earth can't be the point of creation. And man can't be the point of the earth. Can't be. Just impossible. But it's a funny thing about that. It's amazing how, when things are first looked at, they seem to disprove Revelation. And yet so often, so often, when they go on, they prove the truth of it. When we didn't know anything about genetics, evolution almost seemed plausible. Since the discovery of genetics, it just couldn't have happened the way they say. It's just not possible. And yet they still keep doing it. They discover, finally, after doing a lot more with genetic research and chromosomes and all that, they discover that all human beings are descended from a single female ancestor. Well, there's a lot of yapping. This isn't Eve. And it doesn't mean that we necessarily have a single male ancestor. A few years later, when they've, gotten the notion of this one woman with a horde of men, and where did they come from? But what do we find for reasons I can't begin to explain because I don't know? It was easier initially to follow this trail with female chromosomes. But they got to the point where they could follow the male chromosomes. And you'll never guess what they found! We all have a single male ancestor. So what was the reply? There's no proof that the two ever made it. How do we know? Well, maybe they never knew each other. Ships that passed in the night. But you see, what happens? Similarly, when they discovered that all galaxies are evenly spaced, I remember reading about it in the Scientific American. 3/4, well, not that much, but over half, of the article was dedicated to proving that this did not mean that there was a divine construction of the universe. And less than half was dedicated to the thing itself, because the obvious implication was precisely the one they didn't want. But you see, if there were a way, ladies and gentlemen, to solve the current conundrum we've been discussing this evening, it'd absolutely solve it. You know what? Once again, Catholic revelation would be vindicated. Once again. Why? Because it's true. Whether or no there are aliens, whether or no there are fairies, whether or no there's anything, doesn't matter really. What matters is the water of life and the bread of life. That's what matters. Unless, well, I don't know. Do you think that's true, or do you think that aliens are among us?
Only the Coulombes. No. You see, as far as I'm concerned, it could be wee folk. I think there are wee folk. I have no problem with that. The problem I have with the whole alien thing is that it constantly is used to undermine the Catholic faith. It's constantly used as a tool to say, well, then Christ's sacrifice is meaningless because it doesn't apply to the universe. It only applies to us. And I think the fall of Adam was. It makes more sense to say when Adam fell, the universe fell, than to say just the earth fell, and the chaos that's out there is somehow still paradise. You know, that doesn't make sense to me.
Supernova.
But as you say, we can't. We don't have enough information. But it's you said it in passing, but it's quite true. When they started finding these big bones, dinosaur bones, you know, so I actually remember hearing preachers say things like, "The devil put those there to test our faith." You know, it's like, well, no, they're bones, or fossils anyway, of bones left in the rock. We don't exactly know how those things got there or what their history is. But the assumption so many people make is, oh, it means our faith is wrong. Well, no, it means we don't know that piece of the puzzle yet.
How can the incarnation be part of Christian revelation in light of such intoxication?
Exactly.
If you want to get out of the faith somehow, anything will do, even big bones. And that, you have a world that really wants to get out of the faith. The will precedes the intellect, ladies and gentlemen. And it will seize on anything. Anything. The aliens are wonderful. Well, you know, you've got a parallel phenomenon today also. I love pop culture. It's endlessly fascinating. The angel phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And you know, there's a how do you call it? A traveling exhibition. Angels of the Vatican. They've got several high-ranking cardinals stuffed. No, that's not it at all. That's got works of art depicting angels from the Vatican. And they asked there's this priest who's going around with the show, and they said, so what do you think it is? And he said, well, angels are sort of a non-threatening expression of spirituality. I thought, non-threatening? Now what does the good Monsignor mean by that? What he means by that, of course, is that it's a way of spirituality we like because it's beyond, it takes us out of the mundane. We don't like religion, and certainly not the Catholic religion, because it means rules. We want to feel elevated, but we don't want to pay for it. And angels, you see, are a sort of non-specific, non-threatening way of being
spiritual
without being
regimented.
You bet. The will precedes the intellect. Oh, well, no, we call them separated angels now. They're not devils. They're separated angels.
Yes, our separated angels. Yeah.
They're attending another ecumenical conference. It reminds me of a cartoon I saw after the Vatican Council. It was beautiful. I've seen it reprinted in a few places. You see the devil coming out of St. Peter's and these two priests going in. And the one says to the other, do you think we're getting a little too ecumenical? But
Did the devil have a pipe with a lot of smoke coming out of it?
did you see the cover of the New Yorker? It shows the Pope and Castro from the back on sort of chaise longue on the beach. And the Pope's got a pina colada. It's called At the Beach. Anyway, but no, it's an unfortunate thing that we're so constituted. And unfortunately, as you were bringing up with technology, I mean, technology has given all sorts of people a way out. I mean, you know, now we have electric light, so we don't have to believe in God. You know,
Any excuse will do.
any excuse will do, and that's why, you know, if you ask, are these things evil in and of themselves? I would say for the most part, no, because we want them.
They're indifferent, really,
Yeah.
I think.
If you want to get out of the church, if you want to get out of the faith, you will. The problem is, of course, there are a ton of us who are sort of wimpy, you know, we just go along with whatever. And people like that will lose their faith when the society loses its faith. In a society where Catholicism is the state religion and so on, they'll go along with it, you know, and they'll do what they have to do, and, you know, maybe they'll save their souls, who knows. As Charlie Wilson said, tepid souls have rights too. But it's again, that's the dangerous thing about the space phenomenon. There's an interesting thing though on the internet. I discovered you can find all sorts of great things on the internet. A group called ARCSEC, ARCSEC. I forget what it stands for, so I have to look it up if you've got access. But basically, they're astronomers and people like that who are Catholic. And I was shocked when I was looking at their thing, because it was all about A, pushing the faith amongst the actual space community, and B, to the degree that we ever do any colonizing, to get it out there as well, wherever we go. And what amazed me was they were talking about the necessity of the church for salvation and things like that. I mean, it was, I looked at this and I picked my jaw up off the floor and thought, gee willikers, Feniites in space. You know, I've seen it all now. Yeah. Well, the first manned voyage to Mars was filled with Feniites. They were the only ones the UN felt were expendable. But, but no, I mean, and again, you know, I looking through the essays on the site, I saw where a number of these folks had actually come into the faith or either been converted or reconverted precisely because of their astronomical studies, you know, and they're working with the space program and so on. Because that's the other thing, you see. To one of goodwill, anything can be a means of grace.